Hey guys, how's it going? Companion here. Today's going to be a little bit of a different video where we're going to talk about how frequently you can expect to run into the most destructive cards, the most punishing cards in Arena. Now, when it comes to Constructed, you obviously build your deck, you do all that type of thing, but when it comes to Arena, you should be playing around some cards, but the rarity, and more importantly, how frequently people actually pick the cards considering the rarity really matters when it comes to whether you choose to or choose not to play around one of these very significant cards. Today I'm going to be talking about board clears, and the statistics are just that. We're going to be going over some very interesting data that was sourced from HearthArena. HearthArena is a site where people can get a better impression and can get numerical values on whether or not a card, when they're drafting an arena, is better than the other two cards. And because people go through this process, because people generally try to do their best when they play arena, they use systems like the one HearthArena has, and as a very nice side effect, HearthArena collects a lot of statistics based on arenas. And this is actually probably the absolute best place outside of Blizzard themselves to retrieve this data and talk about its implications. So in terms of the actual data from HearthArena, the statistics I'm going to give you guys are all their registered arena runs, all their registered TGT decks since the Grand Tournament has come out. It is a total of 634,290 TGT decks, so as it turns out, these days their website is fairly popular. How about that? And that gives us a very nice statistical sample of what to expect. So, let's start off with the Druid stuff. Starfall. 0.2495. So what does this number mean? I asked for statistics to see what the average number of each of the following board clears exists in the Druid deck, so the deck that corresponds to that class. So the 0.2495, it's basically like a quarter, right? So it means that 1/4 of the Druid decks that you will face in Arena will have a Starfall in their deck. Okay, they might have more than one, but they might also have 0. In fact, the expected result is much closer to 0 than more than 1 because we can see the value. So this is pretty relevant, but it is a statistic that you kind of have to apply some kind of, opinion-based value, because when you're playing at 0-0, when you're playing your first game of Arena, this is literally what you can expect. 1 in 4 Druid decks at 0-0 in Arena will have this, but generally in Arena, the board clear cards are the extremely powerful ones. They are very signature cards that propel a deck to a high number of wins. So while at 0-0, the expected result of Starfalls is exactly 1 in 4 decks, when you're at like 7-0, or let's say 10-1, you might expect that the average number of Starfalls in that range is going to be like 1, or maybe even over 1. So that's important to realize, and you should up the frequency of how often you play around these cards based on how well you're doing in your current arena run, because the system tries to match you up against someone of similar win rates. Back to the statistics, Starfall basically 0.25. It's pretty interesting. You'll see that a lot of the rare quality cards have about this statistic. It basically means that 1 in 4 decks, they're going to have it. Let's say 1 in 2, let's say 1 in 1 at the high win bracket. But even then, if you don't see some hints of your opponent having it, your opponent dropping all your creatures to 2 health in very weird ways, you probably shouldn't play around these rare cards. We have Swipe, though, which is a 0.69. So, it's a common card. It's a class card. And this means that it has a lot of bonuses as to how frequently it shows up in the draft selection. It also, because it is one of the best cards in the game, it is certainly one of the best Druid common cards, it will be picked nearly, or in this case, quite actually every single time it's offered as one of the options in the draft. So this is really as frequently as you can expect to see a board clear. So, that time when you're playing against Swipe, in Constructed, you basically know a druid is going to have 2 swipes in their deck. So yeah, you'll play around swipe on turn 4. But in Arena, you have to really take this back, If it's really only 70% of decks that actually have swipe in it at all, maybe turn 4, it's totally acceptable to play completely into swipe, because even though they are likely to have 1 copy of the card in their deck, it's really quite unlikely that they have it by turn 4. So this means that if you have a deck that you think is bad, or that you think is bad for the number of wins where you're at, you can take the risk and play deliberately into swipe, because otherwise you'll play too slow and maybe lose the game. So it's some very interesting information here. As for hunters, we have Unleash the Hounds at 0.6, so a little bit less frequent than swipe. That's again kind of expected. And Power Shot is a pretty interesting card. It is a rare quality card, but it has been picked a lot. Also, we know that TGT cards have a 25% bonus, so that's why it has a little bit of a higher occurrence than Starfall. But Power Shot, even though it is a rare, it is a little bit of a factor because it is a TGT rare, and we see it picked almost every single time because, 0.4 is really high occurrence for a rare card. So the next time you're playing against a Hunter in Arena, if they're at high number of wins, there's a good chance they're up there because they have a Power Shot. So your positioning might be really, really relevant. Maybe you don't want to group 3 creatures with 2 or less health in the same 3 spots on the board. Mage is obviously the big one. Flame Strike is a 0.68, so basically it's 0.69, almost as high as Swipe. Sometimes I think you can't really have too many swipes, but you can have too many Flame Strikes. I have had a deck with 7 Flame Strikes in the past, and I can tell you that many Flame Strikes is too many. But if I had 7 swipes, that is a little bit too many as well, but I would complain less. And for this statistic, I asked the HearthArena guys to give me a little bit more information. For Flame Strike, they had almost 140,000 mage decks in their system since TGT. 51% of those decks have at least 1 Flame Strike, and some of you guys are probably, whoa, what's going on here? Why is 51% different than, 0.6895? Well, 0.6895 is the average number of Flame Strikes in their deck. So, if a lot of decks have 2, but a lot of decks have 0, that's kind of like the average. But, for a common board clear card like Flame Strike, like Swipe, you can expect this. About half the decks will have it. At least 1 copy. Now, you guys know I've made a video on YouTube about that run where I did have 7 Flame Strikes. And, I asked them to show me the breakdown of how often this card shows up and is picked in the arena drafts of the players who use HearthArena. So, out of the 140,000 times, 50,000 or 36% had 1 in their deck. 13% had 2 Flame Strikes. 2.2% had 3 Flame Strike. 0.12% had 4 Flame Strikes. So, that's like basically 1 in 1,000. 1 in 1,000 mage decks have 4 Flame Strikes. So if you get Flame Striked 3 times, just don't play around the 4th one. Yeah, it might happen, but it's really unlikely. 5 Flame Strikes, it's 0.00. There was only 6 decks out of 140,000 that had 5 Flame Strikes. As for 6 Flame Strikes, only 1 deck out of the 140,000 mage decks actually had 6, and none had any more than that. So it just goes to show how ridiculous of a probability it is to get 7 Flame Strikes these days. So, just kind of some fun, and it gives you guys some interpretation of what you can expect for repetitive board clears as well. And similar things should follow with like Swipe. So if you get swiped like 4 times, just play as if they don't have the 5th one, because it's statistically unbelievably unlikely. Moving on, Blizzard 0.316. We see that it's not quite as popular as Power Shot because Blizzard often is a worse Flame Strike. even though it has a lower mana cost and it sometimes has a bigger impact to actually freeze the creatures or lead into a flame strike, you generally kind of overkill in some situations on board clears, so some people hesitate a little bit to pick Blizzard after they already have a few flame strikes. Consecration 0.625, a little bit less than the Swipe and Flame Strike number because, again, you don't want too many Consecrates, and Consecrate often is not the best card for Paladin. If you have a really, really strong early game, you won't really need a Consecrate. In some situations, you might need like a True Silvermoor. So yeah, you might not go for the Consecrate. It's not really the best Paladin common card as a result. It's not picked quite as much. And again, you don't have to play around it quite as frequently. Holy Nova 0.64, a little bit higher than Consecrate. It is certainly a must-have priest card these days. I'm actually surprised the number is so low. Light Bomb 0.1096. This means 1 in 10 decks, or actually closer to 1 in 9 decks, will have Light Bomb in it. So that's ridiculously low, which means unless you're going to win the game absolutely no matter what, no chance of anything else happening, then you can play around Light Bomb. But other than that, 1 in 10 decks has Light Bomb. They actually have to draw the Light Bomb as well, so the chances are in the low single digits that will actually happen. Blade Flurry 0.20. Not too great because you kind of need weapons to utilize the card, so it's not seen quite as frequently, but there is another Rogue board clear that you should be aware of because Rogue is now a very popular class in Arena, and that is a Dark Iron Skulker coming in at 0.3, let's say 2. So, 0.32, that's, that probably means close to maybe 1 in 3 decks actually have a Dark Iron Skulker, maybe a little bit more than that. So you might actually have to start playing around this card. Even though against Rogue, tempo is such a big deal, if you think you can win and slow down your tempo, maybe you should consider that. Lightning Storm is a very interesting card, 0.337. I've actually had a moment where I chose not to play around Lightning Storm at like 7-1. My opponent needed a turn 3 Lightning Storm basically to not lose the game because I played my entire hand. I had a very aggressive hand, and I figured if I slow play a very aggressive hand, specifically against the Shaman, I probably will lose. Shamans have so few board clears that if I just basically vomit everything on the board, unless they have Lightning Storm, I win the game. And this is basically the scenario that I'm trying to inform you guys more about with these statistics, because statistically, my play was correct because, 1 in 3 decks, maybe 1 in 2 decks, let's say at that amount of wins, will have Lightning Storm. For them to have it specifically on turn 3, where they've literally only drawn 6 cards out of their 30-card deck, is just a really, really low chance. And yes, sometimes you'll lose your odds like I did, but most cases, you gotta play the odds. You gotta skew your RNG in the best way possible, and hopefully these numbers help you do that. Elemental Destruction is an epic card, but it's a 0.15, higher than some of the epic board clears, as I've mentioned, because it has the TGT card occurrence bonus. So, Elemental Destruction is actually considered one of the best Shaman cards, and because Shaman lacks so much on board clears, you can expect them to pick it almost every single... Actually, you probably expect any competent player to pick it basically every single time. So, now you don't have to worry too much about Lightning Storm, but you have to consider the possibility of Lightning Storm and or Elemental Destruction. But Elemental Destruction on turn 3 can be devastating for a Shaman to play because they have no turn 4. So, yeah, it makes the turn 3 all-in against the Shaman still basically a good play all the time. Moving on to Warlock, we have Hellfire, 0.32. Not as frequently picked as some other board clears because there's a negative side effect of this card. It's not always a very good fit. Shadow Flame, though, for a rare card, it does see a pretty high occurrence at 0.25. And Demon Wrath, can't forget about that one, 0.22. Not as good as Shadow Flame for the same rarity, but when you really tally up all 3 of the board clears on Warlock, you kind of see the picture that a Warlock is actually extremely likely to have a board clear. And it's something I didn't quite realize before looking at these statistics, because it just so happened that I assumed most Warlocks don't have board clears. But that's just not true. It's actually more likely you're going to get hit with a Warlock board clear than a Flame Strike from a Mage. So, good to know. Of course, we don't want to forget about Warriors. Revenge is kind of a board clear. It's kind of a board clear because if they're on 12 life, it's a very good card. But if you can push them past that, well, it's okay if you kill them, I guess. So it's not too often picked because it has that little bit of a downside if you're above 12 life, and because of that you basically should never play around it, even if you're playing against a warrior. Brawl, even of a less occurrence, Brawl in Arena isn't very good because you kind of need very powerful swing cards to come into play after the Brawl. You're not playing a constructed deck. You might have a few Dream Brawls here and there, but generally it's not really going to work, so I don't blame people who pick Brawl in such a low occurrence there because it's just not a very good card, especially in my experience, in most games. Now, there are some neutral board clears that you can maybe consider when you're playing Arena. There is Baron Geddon coming in at 0.0075, which is really, really, really low. Basically, that means that less than 1 in 100 decks is going to have a Baron Geddon. So, you just don't play around Baron Geddon. As for Deathwing, the other legendary board clear, the other neutral board clear that you might see from time to time, it's slightly more than 1 in 100 decks. So again, you can consider to play around Deathwing. If you're at that stage in the game, you're going to win basically like, you're going to win like 99.5% of the times where he needs Deathwing or I'm going to win. But yeah, sometimes if you're winning by that much, you can consider to hedge your bets against that last 0.5%. So, some interesting statistics, some interesting things to consider when you are playing Arena, when you are playing against maybe a high win or a low win opponent. And maybe you can up your game, up your strategy, now that we know a little bit more information. Again, thanks so much to HearthArena for providing some of the statistics. And, with more people using the sites, these statistics will be more and more accurate and, of course, more and more relevant. Hope you guys learned something. Hope you guys enjoy it. And I'll see you guys tomorrow.